Welcome, Tony.
Hi.
Hello, Tony. Nice meeting you. I think it's the first time that um, we met.
Yeah,
Yeah. So far we just contact via the mobile phone.
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me today, Phyllis.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. In fact, I know Tony is because of one occasion. I would like to invite some speaker to talk about SDG, and then I get the reference from the University of Chinese University. In fact, you also come from the
Yeah,
Chinese
yeah,
University. Yeah,
yeah. Long time ago.
long time ago. I know that. You okay? Let me have a brief introduction about Tony. Okay, Tony is a CEO and founder of the Alaya Consulting Limited. Yeah, he found Alaya in Hong Kong and also Shenzhen, focusing on ESG with nearly 2 decades of experience advising those kind of C-suite executive. And he kickstarted the Hong Kong SDG Reporting Award. I'm not sure whether you have uh, participate in this award. This award promoting industry best practice in Hong Kong. I think I will pass the time to Tony to introduce about this his presentation.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you,
your time,
Phyllis.
Tony.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Green Council, for having me today. My topic today is reporting SDGs, why and how. I will talk about how first and then the why. So Alaya has been here in Hong Kong for 6 years. Me and my team have completed over 200 ESG reports. What I can say is about reporting is it is neither the start nor the end of a company's sustainability strategy and implementation. It is a strategic tool that engages stakeholders, shapes business strategy, attracts investment. So what is the difference between reporting on ESG and SDGs? Generally, reporting on SDGs will more widely consider impacts external to the business, looking at maximizing opportunities by addressing risks to people and the environment throughout operations and value chains, and developing beneficial products, services, or investment that help advance the SDGs. Although SDGs do not explicitly mention the G, governance, describing corporate governance involvement in SDG reporting provides an indication of the management oversight of SDG impacts. Reporting SDG requires board involvement and management buy-in because to implement change at the scale that is necessary to achieve the SDGs, companies will need to change their strategies to make alignment with the SDGs a core part of their products and services. Disclosures in a sustainability or ESG report should therefore reflect the significant impacts that are prioritized internally and that shape how senior management defines company strategy and allocate resources. On this slide, we see three connected guides that help promote effective and principle-based reporting on SDGs. These three documents can be downloaded for free and should be used together. So if you are serious about reporting SDGs, I strongly advise you to go through these three documents. In the middle, the analysis of the goals and targets provide a list of potential business actions and existing disclosure from established sources that business can use to measure and report on the contribution to the SDGs at the level of targets. On the left-hand side, the practical guide outlines the three-step process to embed the SDGs in existing business and reporting processes in alignment with GRI standards and recognized principles. We will take a closer look at this document in my presentation. On the right, the document aims to better align SDG disclosure with investors' information needs. This is the reason why we need to report SDGs. In fact, there is a strong business case for investing in opportunities aligned with the SDGs. including helping investors secure stable returns, better represent the values of their clients. And we will touch on this part some more later in the presentation. Let's look at the first document briefly. There's no denying that the private sector plays a vital role in achieving the SDGs. This analysis of the goals and targets help companies report on the SDGs in a comparable and effective way. By reporting their progress, companies will improve their performance, which will enable meaningful progress towards achieving the SDGs. This analysis is intended to be used in combination with the document, the practical guide to defining priorities and reporting. The analysis is an inventory of possible disclosures per SDGs. Here is what it looks like. It lists qualitative and quantitative disclosures for SDG targets that are likely to be relevant to businesses regardless of size, sector, or operating location. It also lists illustrative actions that businesses can take to contribute to the achievement of each target. In cases where there are no relevant disclosures for particular targets, the document highlights these gaps, signaling areas where new disclosures need to be developed in the future. Therefore, this analysis is the first step for business to report on the SDG. Let's look at the second document, the practical guide to defining priorities and reporting. This practical guide offers a structured approach to help companies choose which targets to report on and how to use the reporting to drive action. It is meant to be used together as part of a company's regular reporting cycle. Companies can use them to disclose their impacts on and contributions to the SDGs, for example, through reporting according to the GRI standards. By integrating the SDGs into corporate reporting, this guide helps corporations move beyond the current trend of simply mapping activities and programs against the SDGs to drive change. Make no mistake, this practical guide does not create yet another new reporting framework. In fact, it outlines a simple three-step process to embed the SDGs in existing business and reporting processes. Step 1 addresses the process of prioritization of impacts and the identification of SDGs for a company to act and report on. Step 2 looks at how to set business objectives, select disclosures, and analyze performance. Step 3 offers tips and guidance on reporting and improving SDG performance. So let's take a closer look at each step. Step 1, we need to define priority SDG targets. To do that, first, we have to review all the SDGs and the 169 targets. Consider how the SDGs might relate to your business. Reflect on risks to people and the environment, as well as on beneficial products, services, and investment. While doing so, consider both your own operations, and it is also important to consider your value chain. Secondly, consider targets you had not foreseen under certain SDGs and to which your company could make a significant difference by tackling this risk. For example, SDG 3 on good health and well-being includes a target to halve the number of global deaths and injuries from road traffic accidents. Road traffic accidents may be a high risk for people working for extractive companies or companies with large distribution networks. Reducing death and injuries from road accidents could therefore be a priority SDG target for these companies. Thirdly, identify other unanticipated targets that you could advance by applying your company's skills and capabilities. For example, SDG 9 on industry, innovation, and infrastructure includes a target to increase the access of small-scale enterprises to financial services, particularly in developing countries. This might offer beneficial products and service opportunities if you are a bank or a tech company. Thirdly, consider the interconnected nature of the SDGs, because your action may contribute to more than one target or one SDG. For example, a renewable company would most likely identify SDG target 7.1, ensuring universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services as a priority. This is also linked to SDG 13.1 to strengthen climate-related resilience and SDG target 1.4 to ensure access to basic service. With this overview of the SDGs and their targets in mind, you are ready to identify the priority SDG targets for your company based on 2 entry points that we will talk about in the next slide. So after reviewing all SDGs and targets and how they relate to your business and value chain, we can then assess the significant impacts linked to its operation and value chain. There are 2 entry points through which a company can identify SDG targets, and we will look at a couple of examples in the next slide. It will typically take several rounds to arrive at a full picture of risk. Using this process will help identify gaps in the company's knowledge that require further investigation. It is also important to point out that we have to avoid cherry picking and so-called SDG washing. Cherry picking refers to selecting goals and targets based on what is easiest for companies rather than what accounts for the highest priorities. SDG washing means reporting on positive contributions to the global goals and ignoring important negative impacts. On the left-hand side, it is the entry point A. The example here is an apparel company. First, we identify a full picture of risks to people and the environment linked to this company's operation and value chain. Concerning the company's own operation, the company identifies a priority to reduce its negative impact on SDG 8, decent work in its operation, by providing a living wage to all employees. For this exercise, it is critical that you look for past or existing negative impacts that you have seen in your company or industry, as well as new types of negative impacts that could arise in the future. On the right-hand side, it is entry point B, which is to identify SDG targets you can best contribute through beneficial products, services, or investment. For example, an ICT company could apply its technology that advances SDG 4 on quality education by making its product available to local schools. The focus here is on how the company can apply its skills and capabilities to develop new products and services that contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. While we understand this might not be immediately possible for some companies, the exercise could highlight ideas to make this possible in the future. And there are more, some more 5 to 6 mini steps regarding these 2 entry points, including risk identification and risk mapping. So if you are serious about reporting SDGs, I strongly advise you to go through the practical guide in more details. From the previous step, you have identified 2 sets of priority SDG targets. One set is based on assessment of risk to people and the environment. The other set of priority SDG targets is based on the exploration of beneficial products and services or investments. With these sets of targets related to your impacts, and stakeholder inputs, your company can now complete the process of defining report content, including an assessment of materiality in line with GRI standard. The practical guide is closely linked with the GRI standards. It does not represent a separate or additional process, but assists companies in integrating connections to SDG targets in their existing reporting process based on the GRI standards. So if you are familiar with the GRI reporting and have experience in the process of defining report content based on GRI principles, you can use this outcome as input for identifying risk to people and the environment that link to your company's operation and value chain. So let's look at step 2. With 2 sets of priority SDG targets, you need to set objectives to contribute to these targets. When doing so, to maximize the impact and clarity in both your company's actions and reporting, you need to identify strategies and specific objectives that go beyond just avoiding harm to find opportunities to maximize positive outcomes. And this will support durable change and will help your company secure its license to operate. Sustainable development is about making tough decisions, but trade-off between positive and negative impacts can be problematic. In particular, negative human rights impacts cannot be offset by other positive impacts. For example, a renewable energy installation may reduce a region's dependence on fossil fuels, but if it displaces local indigenous communities without the consent, the positive and negative impacts cannot be offset. They must be addressed in their own right. Once you have established objectives to contribute to each of your priority SDG targets, you need to identify the indicators you will use to measure progress against them. And to adequately report impacts, it is necessary to combine qualitative and quantitative disclosures. Qualitative disclosures provide narrative information on how and why a company identifies and analyze and responds to its impact. I'm sure you all are pretty familiar with collecting data, and I'm not going to go into details, but bear in mind, data relevant to your performance on priority SDG targets might already exist within your company. If data is not available for evaluating whether the company is achieving its objectives, you should establish new indicators. Let's look at a couple of examples. On the left-hand side, it is an example showing indicators relating to water purification of a company's operation. For certain topics, there are no existing or established disclosures available. You can either report on the management approach for those topics, or you may wish to develop your own disclosure or rely on other sources to fill the gaps. On the right-hand side, the example demonstrates how data collection links to data analysis, including an assessment of data sources and follow-up action planned. While external reporting to your shareholders and stakeholders support the constructive engagement in your company's overall performance and areas for improvement, don't forget internal reporting to management and the board is also critical, especially for resource allocation and integration of your SDG strategy into your company's business model. SDG reporting should provide shareholders and other stakeholders a basis for informing the insights and decisions. So consider the information needs of your investors, regulators, customers, civil society, as well as other stakeholders. Regularly assess if you are meeting the objectives or not. Anticipate performance gaps, reflect on your improvements, and include this information in your reports. Internal communication is as important as external reporting to support successful integration of SDG in your company strategy. So consider communicating your strategy and progress to the broader workforce to encourage employee engagement. Here on the left-hand side, there are some tips for you to make sure information that you should be included in your external report. On the right-hand side, it is a reminder that you should seek to link to relevant international agreements or commitments, as well as local and national policies when disclosing information on your company's contribution to SDG targets. Okay, here we look at the why. This document provides perspectives and recommendations on the key parameters of corporate reports that refer to the SDGs, which investors are most likely to find useful. Investor needs to know the positive and negative effects that a business has on contributing to the SDG targets. So to demonstrate what good investor relevant business reporting around the SDG looks like, company needs to provide relevant SDG data so that investor can make informed decision and direct capital towards investment with positive real world impact. On this slide, we see the mapping between the business activities throughout the reporting cycle and the actions taken by investors. Investors use SDG information in three main ways: screening portfolios, integrating information about business impacts on the SDGs into business decisions, and in engaging engagement activities and strategies to improve corporate performance and reduce negative impacts. In terms of messaging and approach, on this slide, we see the 10 recommendations to develop investor relevant SDG reporting. In terms of message and approach, investors expect clear description of the process for establish the material issues. On strategy and governance, investors want insight into how well the management sees and understand the relevancy of the SDGs. Regarding the reporting content, investor needs to understand both positive and negative impacts. And about the data format, for reporting to be effective, data needs to be concise, consistent, comparable, pretty much the reporting principles advocated by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and the GRI. To conclude, there are three takeaways for today's presentation. The SDG provide a common language for stakeholders, and SDG reporting allows us to focus on material issues. Measuring and reporting this performance helps support the integration of the SDG into strategy. And lastly, although during these difficult times, many companies have scaled back their resources on sustainability reporting, they should also realize that companies with better ESG governance, better alignment with business strategy will help them to come back stronger. Well, that's it for my today's presentation. Thank you, Green Council, for having me.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, you have a very detailed presentation. Yeah, and very step by step.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have some question for you. I know that you are very strong and professional in SDG report writing and also doing the award. I'm a layman. Okay, how can I differentiate between a good SDG and a bad SDG reporting?
Yeah, that's a very good question. First of all, one of the reporting principle is balance. So if you can, when you read an ESG or sustainability report and you can see the company is quite transparent about their negative impacts, then you can tell they are, they are quite trying to achieve this balance principle and not afraid of telling you some bad news. But on the other hand, they will also provide the timeline for the company how to alleviate these negative impacts.
Oh, okay. That means they have to be transparent.
Yeah.
Don't just tell you the beautiful picture. Yeah. Okay. That's how I will know that. Yeah. And you mentioned that companies should look at the value chain. Yeah, and in the reporting. But in fact, I found that many companies in Hong Kong, most of them, they still do not report the data of the value chain, so-called scope 3. Yeah. Is it a common problem in Hong Kong, or do you have any advice on that? Because value chain, in fact, the value chain contain a lot of carbon emission.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Phyllis.
Yeah.
It is ESG reporting is pretty much a regulatory-led landscape. So if the regulator, for example, in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange requires listed companies to disclose impact on value chain, or for example, like you said, the scope 3 carbon emissions, then the companies will do that. Otherwise, there's less incentive for them to take this forward. And it's also the same case the rest of the world. It's regulatory led, but also investor is pushing for more transparency, especially impacts on the value chain. So there are some investor-led agencies that encourage companies to report these value chain impacts. So it's a good sign, and we expect to see more.
Okay. But that means in Hong Kong, there's still no regulation on the reporting of the scope 3, is it?
It is not a requirement yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And okay, maybe the time is quite tight. And you talk about a lot about SDG, and also, but how do the international investor, they look for the SDG reporting?
If you look at the trend of funds flowing into responsible investment, is a very encouraging trend. So and this trend will not, reversed. So we will continue to see funds flowing into responsible investment, pushing and encouraging more listed companies to be more transparent and disclose more information that has impact to the environment and to the people.
That's an online question, is whether the reporting negative impact is a must.
I would say personally, yes, because otherwise your ESG report looks like a marketing collateral.
But but he also commented it's quite difficult to see the incentive in doing so.
True, because again, it's not required by the regulator. Therefore, it is not, some companies may choose to do it. Some companies with more resources and have the practice of higher transparency, they will do it.
But frankly speaking, if every business is just looking at the legal requirement, it's not so sustainable.
You will see companies
Okay.
driving higher transparency actually enjoy advantages over their peers.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Tony. Thank you.